All right. So, brief kind of intro to the show, overview of what the show is about. Is about. I think I told you a bit before, right?
A little bit. I listened to a few episodes too because I was curious about it. But yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah. So
Your
it's
own
about
words.
So the business is about helping people register their businesses, incorporate, and file trademarks. And then the way I picked those services in particular is these are mandatory things that every entrepreneur business owner has to do, and they're a complete pain in the ass. They're a huge headache, and it's a lot of learning and a lot of problems to go through for something you only have to do once. So we're like the headache-free solution. And then the podcast is kind of the content marketing branch where when you register a business, you kind of cross the threshold into the world of entrepreneurship. And then the content is for people who are maybe working their 9-to-5 job, or they're thinking about becoming a business owner or a freelancer or stepping in, and they kind of want to peer into the portal to this other world. I'm using weird language because I base it off of this idea called the hero's journey. So you can kind of search on a wiki. There's like this, it's an interesting kind of narrative structure for how human beings tell stories.
Oh, interesting. I should read that later.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So like if you think about like the hymn Amazing Grace, it literally is like the perfect example of that storyline. So you have like the hero, the person who's telling the story, the hero, they were living in the ordinary life, and then there was a call to adventure, and they pass over through a threshold into the special world. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And then we overcome some sort of great challenge, and then when they come out of it, they bring that back to the public.
Nice.
So then the song itself, yeah. The song itself is was John Newton who wrote it, right? I think, I don't know.
I don't remember. Sure.
Some old dead guy. Like him writing that was like his kind of like going through his journey, learning something, and then bringing back that which he learned in the quote unquote special world back into the regular world for everyone else, so that they too can start their journeys. Harry Potter follows the same structure. The Matrix follows the same structure. You could go like really, really ancient into like even like the Iliad, when Achilles is called to adventure. When he's asked the question, do you want to die young and become immortal, or do you want to live old and like be forgotten? I don't know how much you're into classics. I'm like throwing some really like obscure. Okay.
No, I know all of those things. Yeah, for sure. I like those kinds of things a lot too. I listened to this. Well, I watched this one YouTube series. Maybe you've heard of it. What's it called? The Messed Up Origins. It's like all the messed up origins of all the fairy tales. So there's this one YouTuber. I think you would like him a lot. His name is Jon Solo, like Jonsolo. And he like every one of his YouTube videos is just like the origin of a classic fairy tale. And he also gets very into different storylines and different story structures. And he talks about one story structure versus another story structure and the different fairy tales that use each structure. And it's really interesting to listen to. I think you'd love it.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I mean, children's stories or like the classics that have survived, they're very complex.
100%. Yeah, I agree. And this one, he has like ancient ones, and then also he talks about Disney, and then sometimes he just talks about Disney stories and then goes like centuries back into like the first time that Disney story was told by whoever wrote it originally, and then goes through all the different versions. The
source material that inspired really cool. Disney's interpretation of it.
100%. It's not always what you imagine. Like you kind of assume that The Little Mermaid was based off of Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid, but there's way more to it than that. Like it's not just one goes into the other, you know?
So not Han Solo, Jon Solo.
Yes, Jon Solo.
I'm gonna write that
Thinking
down.
about Star Wars on the mind.
I was thinking like Jon Snow or Han Solo. No, Jon Solo.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write that down.
Jon Solo.
Love me the humanities and the classics. I don't believe there's such a thing as so I studied social sciences, like sociology specifically. I don't believe there's such a thing as a useless degree, only useless people. Yeah,
that's probably true.
Yeah. And the reality is a lot of people end up in these programs with so-called useless degrees. I found that they were kind of like unmotivated to learn to begin with, and they were forced into university because their parents just, it means something.
Yeah. And then they like cheated their way through school, or they just kind of did the bare minimum and then didn't try and actually remember the things that they learned during university or during college. Like they just kind of tried to check off the box that they got the degree.
Yeah, and that's the worst thing to like. If you did that in accounting, then okay, you're barely qualified to be an accountant, and you can still work a job and do some level of technical skill, or at least the employer sees it that way, right? But with the
Yeah.
humanities, with the arts, if you are basically choosing not to learn, like the threshold, like you can basically be a failure at life and still graduate with a good B, because a lot
Yeah.
of things are very subjective. But the people who really think and wrestle about like, the nature of being, the nature of existence, like ideology, views, and like
Hmm.
what makes us as human beings human, when they come out
Hmm.
of university and they apply that critical set of thinking skills to any trade or any sort of skill set, it unlocks like a whole other level of expertise.
Hmm. And for them, I feel like it's not even about getting a good grade. It could really just be about learning for the sake of learning,
Mhm.
which is cool. Like even if you reflect a lot and work really hard, that doesn't mean that you're going to get an A+. It just means that you might learn something, but
Mhm.
that thing that you learned or that thing that you express in your paper might not be what the teacher is looking for or what would
Yeah,
get you that
yeah,
grade. So
that was
yeah.
my problem. Like I wasn't like my problem was what I knew and what I wrote or how the assignments were graded. It didn't really work because like I don't know. You studied anthropology, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if this was your experience, but my experience was that a lot of the younger profs, especially the TAs, they were using academia as a platform for activism. So they would come from a very
Hmm.
Marxist and a very particular ideological branch of the social sciences, and then
Hmm.
basically disavow everything else. And if you weren't like pushing their perspective, it would affect your grades and your performance.
Oh
And
yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah, I spoke from the heart. I didn't
Yeah.
care. I didn't care about the grades. I cared about actually learning the material, and it cost me like probably at least 15% of my GPA probably.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And then it can be even more work. Like there's certain students who know just what work they have to do to
Mhm,
get a good grade, and then they'll just do that, which is fine because, people are kind of crammed for time when they're in university and
mhm,
college, so they don't always have time to dive into every single different layer of an issue. But if you're to dive into every single different layer of an issue and then you come to the conclusion that is against what your professor might believe,
mhm,
then if you want to get a good grade, you still have to like back up the other side, which is like twice the amount of work because you've basically done the
mhm.
research from two different sides. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It is a
Yeah.
lot of work, but at the same time, I think that's really important. Like I forgot who said
Yeah,
this,
I
but
agree.
if you can't argue the other side's position, you don't deserve to have an
Yeah.
opinion. Now it's a bit of a harsh statement, but I think there's a lot of truth in that. To be able to argue the
Yeah.
other side's position.
Yeah, that's true. It really means that you understand the position that you have thoroughly. So it means
Mhm,
that you're a little bit more objective and you've done your research, and so you're coming to a little bit more of like a researched opinion. But at the
mhm.
same time, it's also important to not let understanding both sides of the argument stop you from listening to the other person's perspective, because there's not always just two sides to something.
Mhm. All
Yeah.
right. So I love this topic, and I'm probably not going to edit it out because this is definitely one of the type of skill sets that are important to business owners.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Like put it in wherever.
yeah. So what do we want to talk about? Do we want to talk about your what you're doing now, your business, you as a person? Like we could probably take this into like 3 or 4 different directions right now.
Let's see. Right now, I'm kind of in the beginning stages of establishing my business slash my brand. So
Mhm,
if you do think that your listeners would be interested in that, that's fine. And then I'm in Tanzania right now. I feel like I should probably talk a little bit about that because there are certain
mhm,
ways that you can like wrap your media skills up with like anthropology or with art skills, and
mhm.
then you can like use your media skills to like as practical skills that can help you work in the field that you want to work in. So we could talk about that if you want to. Yeah, it's up to you really.
Actually, you know what? Let's talk about coming from the perspective of you as a person, because it is the
Okay.
entrepreneurial journey, and I think it's really normal for most entrepreneurs to be a little bit of an eclectic. I don't want to box people off as like, hey, you're a Tanzania person, or hey, you're just. I think you do
Yeah.
photography before, right? It's you as a person, and this is you producing value and your struggle against the world, basically. So, Erin, tell me
Yes,
more
that's true.
about what inspired you to kind of be where you are today.
Okay, let's see. So just as a person, what motivated me to do the things that I'm doing, kind
Yeah.
of. Okay, let's see. So I guess it's been like, how back in high school, no one really knows what they want to do. And so they kind of just stumble into whatever they're interested in. Like when I was in high school, I thought that I wanted to be an architect, but I really just thought that because I knew that I liked math and I knew that I liked art. And then I kind of put the two together and I was like, okay, architect, that's what I'm gonna do. But I ended up, like, I didn't really build up my portfolio so that it would be strong enough to the point that I could get into an architecture program. And so I just kind of went into a general arts program at the University of Toronto because it's a good school. And I was like, yeah, I'm still into art and maybe I can find something that I'm interested in there. And then once I got there, I moved into the new media program because I heard about this from a professor who was teaching me one of the Introduction to Media Studies courses. And he was also my professor for the humanities intro course. And so I heard about the new media program from him, and I liked that it was an applied program. Like basically, for out of the 4 years, in the third year of the program, when I was doing it, you would go to Centennial College and you would learn about coding, film, and design. So I liked that you would come out of the program actually with some practical skills, so you weren't just doing theory for the entirety of university. So I guess that, and then I kind of like picked and chose from other courses what I liked, and I ended up really liking anthropology when I did an introductory class on that, because I really liked my professor and the way that she taught it too, and just the different ethnographies that she got us to read. So that made me really like anthropology, and then it was kind of just a journey from there, figuring out like how I could still use anthropology and still use media as I moved on throughout my career. And yeah, I guess that's like the short version.
So that makes sense. So you have the anthropology skills, you have the media skills. So that explains the creative side of your freelancing work, and then also explains in part what you're doing in Tanzania right now.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us more about what you're doing in Tanzania.
So in Tanzania, I am working with a project called T-Led. I came to Tanzania with a volunteer organization called KUSO. And so KUSO is a Canadian organization that sends volunteers in Canada overseas to work in developing countries. And the thing that kind of sets like KUSO volunteers apart from, say, like another volunteer organization would just be that KUSO volunteers use skills that are relatable to their own career and their own field to go to those developing countries, and then they use their own skills. Like, since I'm in communications and media, when I decided that I wanted to be a KUSO volunteer, I looked up positions in communications and media so that I could go to a developing country and help with those kinds of skills, because that's what I knew about. Like, I didn't want to go somewhere and then teach something or do something that I knew absolutely nothing about. Like, I didn't want to build a house because I have zero construction experience. There's no reason for me to go and help with that. And also there's no proof that that would even help out the community. Like, I didn't get to know the community in that case. I don't even know if they need that building. So that's why I really like KUSO as a volunteer organization. Like, it took me a while to find it because I looked through a bunch of different organizations that I could have went with, but KUSO ended up being what I liked. And I have done one KUSO placement before. Right after graduating from university, I went to Cameroon for 6 months and I worked with an environmental nonprofit there on their website. And then after I finished working with the job that I had back in Niagara in Canada, I worked at this company for 2 years, and then I wanted to do another like KUSO volunteer placement. So I reached out to them and I was like, hey, what do you guys have in media? I want to do a second placement. And they were like, actually, this one project called T-Led is wrapping up, and you can go and you can help out the what they call SMEs, small to medium sized businesses or enterprises. So I would be going there, or I am here, helping out with these SMEs, and I'm working with them on developing their brands for their products because they are in the early stages of their business too. So it's kind of interesting because I'm in the early stage of my business in Canada, and then I'm helping all of these people with their businesses here in Africa and like just helping them establish a base for their businesses. So yeah, I guess that's what I'm doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting that you mentioned before that you want to go with an organization that makes use of pre-existing skill sets. Because one of the things that really, really kind of pissed me off about the voluntourism and a lot of these kind of not-for-profits who intend to do well is actually the amount of damages that they unintentionally cause. So
Agreed.
So with a lot of those house building ones, one of the kind of scandals is a lot of them would basically have people from the Western world or any wealthy part of the world come in, build a fake neighborhood or a bunch of houses that are deliberately torn down afterwards. But where they make the money is it costs like maybe $5,000 or $6,000 or $8,000 for the people to go there for the 2 weeks, and then it costs them very little to get the materials to build the crap house, and then the materials that the money that they took from these kids, they then use to rebuild the actual area, which I find is just so disingenuous and rotten.
I know, it's crazy.
And the worst thing is that's not even the worst one. The worst ones are the ones where you have inexperienced, unskilled labor volunteers of like relatively wealthy kids, because you need money to go to these parts of the world. It's not cheap. And they will actually build a house that people will live in. So now you have unskilled labor from the first world coming in, building terrible houses, while able-bodied men and women in these communities are not empowered to, calm down there, turtles. Now we're able-bodied men and women in the local communities are completely disempowered, and they aren't given the opportunity to learn these skill sets to actually get up and build with their own hands.
100%. Yeah. A huge part of what CUSO does is like one of their mission statements is that they try and empower the community that they work with. They try not to just go into a community, build something, and then leave it to just die once the volunteers leave. Like they want the community to actually see what's happening and get involved. And maybe for the people from the Western world, I guess, who are trained in these certain skills, to work with the community so that the community members can learn these skills and then take them. Because it might sound a little bit white knight still, because it is difficult to put this in a way that it doesn't sound like a white knight kind of thing to do. But when it comes down to it, people in developing countries are a little bit less privileged. Not all of them get to go to school. A lot of them have to leave school early because they get pregnant. For example, like they might be raped, because there's a lot of gender inequality issues. And so there's things like that happening, unfortunately, which we can't really dive into right now. But basically not everyone has the privilege to be able to go and get an education. So that's where when it comes down to people from Western countries who are very privileged, and we can all admit that people who are from these developed nations are very privileged. These people come into these developing countries, and then they can use the education that they got to help empower these people in these communities with skills that they don't mind sharing with them. Because like when it comes down to it, like I want to share my skills in communications and media and branding and marketing with all of these entrepreneurs, because it makes me feel like I've helped them, and it makes me feel like they can move on once we go away, and they can have their own skills, and something really beautiful could be built from that. And it's also a really good chance for me to learn about their culture and kind of open up my eyes to another perspective.
So it's very interesting. So your skill sets are very modern and advanced in the sense of the kind of tools that you use. So like a lot of software and a lot of computers. So do you find that to be an issue there? Like the access to the technology, like and computers that can handle the software that you would need?
I'm really glad that you asked that, because yes, that is a huge issue. A lot of the issue is just that like both in Cameroon and in Tanzania, people don't really have much access to internet. Like us volunteers, we just use the hotspot from our phone, and we're able to pay for like a nice phone plan. Phone plans here are pretty cheap. Like I'm paying 20,000 shillings. I'm paying 20,000 shillings a week for 12 gigabytes of internet for every week. So I get 12 gigabytes of internet for every week, and 20,000 shillings is about $10 in Canadian money. So
that's better than what we get here.
Yeah, 100%.
Like
because
way
at the
better.
End of your month, yes, Canada has one of the most expensive phone plans in the world. Like that's one of the countries with the most expensive phone plans. And so yeah, it is cheap here, like in terms of getting a cheap phone plan, but still people here can't always afford to just hotspot from their phones. And so a lot of them depend on the Wi-Fi in the office, which often goes out because of electrical issues, like the power going out, or just generally sometimes the wiring is just a little bit messed up. So there's also, we're in the rainy season right now too, so there's more power outages than there were in the dry season, so there's that too. But then once they do get this like software installed on their computer, and most of their computers can handle this software, it's just the issue of like being able to get it onto their computer in the first place because of internet and stuff. But
Right.
once you, but like once you're able to download things like Photoshop and Illustrator, then you can still make whatever you want with them. But then it's another issue because like who's going to pay for Photoshop and Illustrator? It's a lot to do with money.
Yeah. And that becomes one of the biggest challenges there is when you have so little resources, because it's not just that, like here, a lot of people lack money and maybe knowledge and willpower, which is kind of lack of willpower, I think, is really a product of privilege. Oh no.
Yeah.
I could literally just never accomplish anything for the rest of my life, and I'll be okay. I'll be a little sad because I haven't accomplished anything, but I'll be pretty like fat and happy. But then over there, like you're mentioning, like the power goes out. The internet is unreliable, and then you mentioned also, I don't know to what degree I want to get into the topic of like rape, but that is something that's really, really problematic, which is also the deeper root issue is corruption, because people can do these atrocious things knowing they can get away with it, or bribe the people who are responsible for keeping this in check.
Yeah.
So
it's there's a lot of really sensitive issues there during our training, because another thing that I like about CUSO is that whenever the volunteers arrive in the country that they'll be working in, they do about a week or more of training in the capital city with the CUSO office before they actually go into the towns that they're working in. So I had my week of training not this week but the week before that in Dar es Salaam, which is the economic capital of Tanzania, and then that was done before I came here to Iringa, and Iringa is about 9 hours west of Dar es Salaam. So it's kind of like right in the middle of Tanzania. It's very landlocked. Yeah. So
would you be
like,
considered
it's nice.
be in the bush?
I'm not really in the bush. No, I'm in a pretty big city. Like Iringa, I think, is the agricultural capital. I mean, Iringa, I'm in Iringa, the town within Iringa, the region in Tanzania. And so Iringa, the town, I think it's the agricultural capital of the region of Iringa.
Okay. And what kind of businesses are you working with?
So let's see. Because this is my first week in the project, like it's Friday afternoon here at like 5 p.m. and I've officially finished 1 week at the TLED office, and I've worked with one SME so far, because that's all that have come into what we call the hub so far to like get help with their brand and their marketing and everything. So he is a person who lives kind of close to the TLED office. He lives in Njumbe, and he makes a product that moisturizes and softens the skin with beeswax and mineral oil. It's kind of similar to Vaseline, but it's they use a purified version of petroleum jelly and not actually petroleum jelly. Okay.
Beeswax, mineral oil, and it's really just a skincare product.
Yeah, exactly. It's a skincare product. So beeswax is meant to like moisturize the skin, and then the mineral oil is supposed to protect the skin. So I think that they work in tandem to do both.
And what's this person's background? To be able
this
to come
person,
up with this
so
kind
of I've only had one meeting with them, so I'm gonna ask a lot of those questions next week, maybe on Monday or Tuesday. But I just know that he started his business and he's interested in getting a different brand for it, and we didn't get very far on our first meeting yet because we were just getting to know each other and stuff. So I don't really know like how he learned to make the product, or if his family made the product before, but those are all questions that I plan to ask next week.
Yeah, because I'm like, that's a really cool idea. And one of my first thing that comes up to mind is the opportunity is huge, of course. And then you have your creative work. You just have to come up with packaging, branding, photography to get that around so people have some sort of emotional connection to the product. But then on the other hand, I did work with some guy who was a chemist who worked for Revlon at one point, and the kind of manufacturing that you need to produce goods like this is pretty complex. Like that would be a huge barrier. So would you guys be helping with loans and financing?
We help them with finding grant resources, and then we're also connected, like TLED as a project is connected to this one granting resource called TIF, or TIFF, but it's not Toronto International Film Festival, and it's only one F. And I think that's the Technology Innovation Fund. So they provide grants to some of our SMEs for things like CNC machines, because a lot of our SMEs benefit from getting big machines so that they can produce more product.
Yeah, and that's one of the super important things about the developing world is being able to get that kind of infrastructure down. Because I was talking to you earlier
Yes.
about the textiles. I asked you to send us some pictures about like some of the clothing that was being sold there. So quick bit of
Oh
background
yeah.
context. Yeah, I used to work for Value Village, which is a thrift store
Oh
that's pretty
yeah.
big. Um,
Hmm.
and
I know of it.
one of their kind of like value propositions for their social consciousness, which I absolutely abhor, is you donate clothing to them. They're a for-profit company. You donate clothing to them. They sort through the stuff and they resell it here. And the leftovers that gets recycled, they sell them by weight to the developing world. So the idea is now these people have good
Oh.
quality Western products, which really is like triple hand-me-downs, right? So
Hmm.
these are like things that are unsellable here, and I think that's just so
Yeah.
disrespectful to then give it to them to sell it. So aside from being disrespectful and trying to position yourself as a good person, it also harms their economy because now these people, they know they could just buy like wearable rags from the Western world. They have no incentive
Hmm.
to build the infrastructure to produce their own textiles because it's expensive to produce factories. But we know with a lot of these developing nations, textiles are one of the fundamental infrastructure things that any
Hmm.
society needs to have before everything else starts scaling, because the technology that you get from there and the skill sets and all that kind of infrastructure, it trickles into everything else.
Yeah. And I imagine that, I mean, there are options in Tanzania and in Cameroon for you to buy brand new clothes because there's a lot of people who are really good at sewing and stitching and
Mhm.
knitting and weaving in both countries. But the thing is those things are more valuable and so therefore more expensive than
Yeah.
secondhand clothing that you can buy like in bulk from the developed world. So, and because people are quite poor usually in these countries, like I believe that Tanzania is the 8th most poor country in the world last time I
Really?
checked. Yeah, I know. I was surprised about that too because Tanzania you'd think would have such a high tourist
Mhm.
market, but apparently that's the case. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
there's a
like
lot of.
people here are still pretty poor, and so they end up probably buying the cheaper product above the product that is more high quality. But
Mhm.
there are a lot more like expats and that kind of thing coming to Tanzania that buy from the higher quality like shops and that kind
Mhm.
of thing. Like there's a lot of people who just sell like handmade leather shoes on the side of the road, which is kind of cool. And so
Yeah.
I imagine that a lot of expats will buy those shoes because they're still high quality and then that still contributes to the Tanzanian economy, which is kind of nice, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm.
Still, we can't be relying on expats.
Yeah. Because at any given point, if like the government does something that pisses off some expats, they could just leave and jump to the next country.
Yeah, that's true too. Like they can't be dependent on expats. They have to, eventually just establish their own way of, anyway, I'm
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
stop my thought there.
Yeah. That's a whole other
Yeah,
conversation, a totally different podcast.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I don't think that I have enough like knowledge to cover that accurately, like completely. And it's a sensitive topic, so I don't want to get too much into it. I need to do some research.
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me more about. I want to hear about the kind of like what your when you chose when. You, okay, I'm gonna have to edit this. Ooh, waving the screen. All right, make the clean cut here. Okay, so tell me about the moment when you realized that you do graphic design and you do photography, right?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna call it creative freelance, if that's
Yeah, sure.
if that's a good kind of description.
I call myself it took me a while to come up with an actual label for myself because I have so many different services that I could offer. So I call myself a digital storyteller. I'm sure other people call themselves that too, but I don't really
Mhm.
know like the extent of it. Anyway, that's what I call myself because I feel like it encapsulates what I do. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So tell me more about the moment where you realized you wanted to be a digital storyteller.
Mm, it wasn't really a moment. It was more like, I mean, there was a moment. I guess like everyone does have a moment, so you're right. But yeah, like after I finished working at that at the knife company at Grimsmo Knives, I knew like even before I finished working at the knife company, I knew that I wanted to do something that was related to freelance work. and I wanted to establish a base of clients. And so it got me thinking about what skills I had that I could provide for clients. And I knew that because I did a lot of product photography and that kind of thing for Grimsmo Knives, and I worked with cameras and I did videography for them, and I did a lot of video editing for them and filming because I made multiple YouTube videos for them like each week. And so I knew that I could do that and I could do it quickly. And so I knew that I could provide those as services, but then I also just really like doing graphic design and I didn't really want to give that up. So I just kind of included that in my services too, because the way I see it, and maybe this will change later on, but the way I see it right now is why limit yourself when you can provide those services and when you do have the skills to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense because you've already been doing it for some time. I mean, you were digitally storytelling for a knife making company.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
And I think at the event when I first met you, you mentioned something about how you're doing that for your employer, and now you wanted to tell a different story. So what's a new story that you're? So it seems like the transition wasn't so much the skill sets; it's more about what story do you want to be telling.
I am so glad that you said that, because that is so true. That's something that I've been thinking a lot about since I left Grimsmo Knives, because although I really like the story of Grimsmo Knives, I think that it is really inspiring and it's great for people who want to become self-taught CNC machinists. I think that that's great. But at the same time, I get really interested by a lot of different stories, and it was kind of limiting to just focus on telling the story of one company. So for me, it's just like refreshing to learn about the stories of a bunch of different entrepreneurs and then try and tell their stories or try and develop their brands, or maybe even just like try to tell the love story of someone who's getting married, or tell the story of a house that's being sold. Just there's stories in everything that's being sold because there's always a person behind it with a story to tell.
Mm-hmm. And are there particular types of stories that you find yourself more gravitating towards?
Yes, cultural stories. So stories relating to people in communities where I'm not familiar with the culture. And that's part of the reason why I gravitated towards Tanzania. I would like to get more into the international development sector. So it's kind of a matter of how I do that. Something that I don't know if I can, maybe I'll just share this because this is fun anyway, but I was doing photos for this one event that we just had this past week. It was this group of youth called Lyra that came into the hub, like the TLED hub where all these different events happen sometimes. So TLED was hosting this group of youth called Lyra, and then I was doing photography for that event because the people at TLED and Kusa were just like, oh, why don't you just bring your camera in and take some pictures? So it was really fun. But I talked to one of my coworkers there and she was like, hey, you like photography, you like videography. I have this one thing that I'm working on as kind of a side project where I help young girls get educated. And I was like, oh, really? And she was like, yeah, would you like to do a documentary about it? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I definitely want to do that. So that could be something on the back burner. And so I think that the more projects that I do that are similar to that, and the more I build up my portfolio to represent that I'm interested in those kinds of stories, then the closer that I can get to actually becoming, or actually being able to call myself an actual documentary filmmaker relating to cultural issues.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that is a lot of the long form content is really, really popular right now. I'm actually just amazed at the amount of time that I spend in my life, just sitting around watching 2-3 hour documentaries or just really long form podcasts. I'll be on the bus and I'll go through a 4-hour podcast, and that wouldn't be out of the question.
I totally agree. I think that a lot of people are saying that oh, all the consumers, they really like bite-sized content, and that's true in some cases. People do often like shorter YouTube videos, but I think a lot of people are listening to podcasts these days, and people are realizing that they're not getting much value from short-form content where you're just hearing a tiny little bit of the story, but it's really just a taste of the story and you don't actually learn anything. So if you listen to a ton of those bite-sized content things, you just spend a ton of time not really learning anything when you could have spent the same amount of time more deeply listening to a podcast or watching a longer form documentary. And even then, those things are just introductions to what research you can do on that topic.
Yeah. And to add on to that, I think a lot of times we kind of underestimate how complex the individual is. Because like I'll watch a lot of I'll watch hours of short form content too, whether it's like 15 seconds, 20 seconds, or a minute. And then I'll also watch a lot of long form. So I'll watch all of it. So whether it's a short form piece of content that connects me to a longer piece of content, or if it's a longer piece of content that inspires me to start looking at other ones, like it goes both ways.
Yeah. And you can learn about stuff from shorter form content too, like to completely contradict what I just said. Because if you just like watched a long form documentary or listened to a podcast and then like did a little bit of research, then you could get like what my previous boss called golden nuggets from each of those little YouTube videos. And you could just take those and kind of form your own thoughts by kind of like connecting those dots.
Yeah. So you're working on one of your I guess your long-term projects would be this long-form documentary on international development, and I'm guessing you're focusing on Tanzania for now.
Yeah, I'm not really working on any long-form documentary right now. I was kind of hoping to, before I went to Tanzania, I was like, oh, maybe I'll make a documentary based off of my experience there. But I think that what people would most be interested in and what would be most valuable would be what we were talking about before this podcast started, was just finding out the story of one person or one hero and then learning about what makes their story inspiring, and then if it relates to a larger issue, then that's what would make it actually an important story. A worker of mine who's starting up this project to work with young women, and she's a Tanzanian too, so she knows about these issues. Like, she grew up in Tanzania, she speaks Swahili, she understands issues. Like, she's a female herself, so she understands. And so if I were able to capture her story, then that would be something that I think a lot of young Tanzanian women could relate to.
Okay. Yeah. And, while you're talking about that, I was thinking wait a second. Are there what's the internet adoption rate like in Tanzania right now?
Do you mean how many people have internet, or?
Yeah. Cause I know because I look, this really random piece of information just came back to my mind. I remember a few years ago, Microsoft did they put a lot of money into researching chicken memes in Zimbabwe.
Chicken beans?
Memes. Here we had
chicken memes?
Yeah, 10, 15 years ago, there's a lot of the internet was kind of stereotyped for having a lot of cat videos.
Yeah.
And then Microsoft was like, well, how come in Zimbabwe and parts of Africa, it's a lot of chicken video? It's like they talk about chickens the way that we talk about cats. So then and their conclusion was people basically make this kind of funny content based on the animals that are just normal in their experience in this part of the world, because we are not around farms, we don't see livestock as much, so we have cats and dogs. Whereas over there, chickens, or at least in that region that they're studying, chickens were just the most kind of common animal running about.
Yeah, and they can be really funny. Chickens can be hilarious. Maybe these are memes that I've seen and have been spread to me from Zimbabwe. You said Zimbabwe, right?
Yeah, well, this study was Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you see that.
I haven't seen specifically chicken memes. Back in Canada, sometimes when I would just see memes on 9gag or on Facebook or something like that, then a chicken one might pop up. There's this one that I saw where it was the chicken head stabilizer, and you could move the chicken's body anywhere, and then it would just keep its head in the exact same spot, and all these filmmakers thought it was hilarious. So that's the one chicken meme. Maybe it came from Zimbabwe.
Who knows? Yeah. But do you see any
power
local?
Just went out.
Oh, okay.
No, it's fine. I'm just saying that's funny because we were just talking about it a few minutes ago, but my power just went out.
Yeah, because I was also thinking so one of the issues is, not everyone has the internet there, and maybe internet adoption isn't, and an individual mobile internet adoption might not be widespread. So I was wondering, on top of that, what is the internet culture like in Tanzania?
Everyone in Tanzania and a lot of other parts in Africa kind of skipped one technology stage, and that is landline phones. Everyone didn't have any technology, they did have technology, but no one really had communications devices until smartphones and cell phones came about. And that has equalized people in Tanzania, and then also caused some disadvantages because some people don't have access to the internet because they can't afford like it, but most people can afford the internet because the phone plans are so cheap. And the way that a lot of people communicate here is through WhatsApp. So and a lot, like basically everyone has Facebook too. So and then I think that more people are getting Instagram because since social media is a global thing, like it's a universal thing, and you can send a message to the other side of the world and it instantly gets to the other side of the world. That's kind of equalized trends. So like trends don't take as long to come to Tanzania or to other parts of Africa as they did before like smartphones existed. So now, like, because Instagram is really big in the West, or not because, but Instagram's really big in the West, and so in Tanzania it's not that different. Like Instagram's also pretty big here too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you notice any kind of like local trends that are happening on Instagram that we basically wouldn't have like access here, or we wouldn't be exposed to here?
I don't think that I've been here long enough to have seen trends in Tanzania on Instagram, and my Instagram is also still pretty Western because I only just got here and maybe I haven't started following enough Tanzanian things. Like I'm following #Tanzania and stuff, but still only the most popular stuff pops up in my newsfeed, like safari pictures and that kind of thing. But I did meet 2 Tanzanian photographers when I was doing photography for that one Lyra event, and I connected with them, and we all follow each other and stuff on Instagram now, and their photos are amazing. Like, I think that the one has a Mark 80D, and he's got an external flash on his camera and everything too. Like, it's way nicer than my Canon Rebel T7i, and his pictures are really nice too. He uses a softbox, like, they look great, and he kind of is lucky because he gets to use all the unique things about about the city of Iringa in his pictures. So it really gives his pictures a certain style that you wouldn't always see, like in Toronto or something. Yeah. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I don't really know many trends in Tanzania.
That's fine. I mean, you're only there for a week, right? So like, usually it takes about like probably a few months of just getting to know individuals, looking at what's on their feed, and then having them building a personal relationship with real human beings who then start sending you like memes. It's a type of, because like on the topic of like ethnography, like I did a little bit of digital ethnography and urban ethnography in undergrad, and I think that's one of the most underrated skills ever. Like when people say like the social sciences are useless, I'm like, guys, ethnography is literally the most important skill set you can learn as a human being. Like you literally become like freaking like Jason Bourne or like 007 anywhere you go. You can like figure out anything about anyone or anything anywhere.
Yeah, it's basically like having these amazing observational skills that you can also take the data that you get from these observational skills and then analyze it to see the trends in a different culture. Like, should we explain ethnography to anyone who's not familiar with like anthropology or ethnographies, etc.?
Oh yeah, that's probably a good idea. So for the viewers at home, ethnography, I like to call it as a professional justification for stalking people.
That's kind of true.
Yeah. So essentially it's So how would you describe it from a anthropology background?
I guess at first I was thinking like maybe I'd describe it as a published piece of work by a researcher who has done observational research and then analyzed their findings into a paper or something, or maybe in my case a documentary, because I would like to do documentaries that essentially serve the same purpose as ethnographies. But my professor, the ethnographies that she had us read in our anthropology classes were just really detailed descriptions of cultural behaviors in a certain place or within a certain lifestyle. So it's kind of that, like, maybe I'll give an example. So there was this one book that we read called Righteous Dope Fiend, and it was about the homeless population in a certain area of San Francisco, and one of the anthropologists / ethnographers went in there and became familiar with that culture and became a part of it and like wrote a lot of observations, and then eventually wrote a book about it. And then there's another one called In Search of Respect by Philip Bourgois, which I do want to read but I haven't read yet, and is along a similar line. And then there's another one that you might be interested in that was kind of the first one that we read, like the first ethnography that we read in our anthropology class, called, what was it called? Something about the, I don't want to say it, but it was a Malinowski book. It was something like Bronislaw Malinowski. I'm gonna have to look it up, but he was basically known as one of the first, or as the first, social anthropologist, because he was forced to stay in the Trobriand Islands for a long period of time around the time of the First World War, and then because he was a white settler from Australia or something like that, he came and then he had to stay there, so he had to learn about the culture and the language, and he ended up with a lot of observations about it and a lot of ways that he analyzed it. But it's also a controversial piece of work too, because he was a little bit racist.
Yeah, it's I've read some of the old colonial stuff, and it's quite racist what they say about the quote unquote savage. It's really bad, but it's still it's history, and it's an important piece of work nonetheless.
I agree.
So I think what you describe a lot of the macro theory that goes into the ethnography. So then those would be the works that you would look about the broad theory about other cultures. So ethnography is really about studying. In anthropology, like usually it's used, from my understanding, as studying and understanding another culture. And a lot of the stuff that I've come across from the anthropology perspective is very broad in general. They can get specific into specific like sub niches and like subcultures and other aspects of society, but typically it's like, hey, introduction to say Southern American culture, introduction to this particular tribe in this island, and then my background in sociology, because we did a lot of the urban stuff, it's more from like instead of the top view, we did more of like the street view. So it's kind of like, what is the experience like for someone living in the ghettos, for example, right? What is the urban impoverished experience like, experienced by the individual who lives that life? And you need both. You need the macro, the top-down view of understanding norms, systems, and institutions, and then you also, and language. But then you also need to know kind of like from the perspective of the individual who lives in that system as normal, like this is normal to them. What is that like for them? So then the macro informs the micro informs the macro. And then what I've found in my undergrad was that this is really, back when they called it new media, it's just media now. The internet is new media, right? This is literally no different than what we experience on the internet. The internet is almost like an augmented form of society. And the difference is, in our society, there's place and there's space, right? There's physical places, physical institutions like the mall, the movies, churches or temples, or the parks where we participate in activity. But that's kind of different now with these, magical squares that we have in our pockets. We go to spaces, but we don't actually go to places. Like it's all kind of like in our head. So it's all imaginary places that we attend now. But at the same time, it's not all imaginary. It's still linked to real physical people. So then one of my ways of doing like virtual ethnography is I like to connect with people who are part of a particular subculture. And then, so that's where like the real life work goes in. It's like learning more about how their experience and what it means to them to engage in certain memes and certain like accounts and certain pieces of content. And then from there, I gather kind of like almost like a stream of content that I'll curate, and then I'll start like watching it and try to start developing different theories about what this whole phenomenon, this relationship of the online and offline and these content and creators and content consumers, like what it means to them. So the audience is probably completely lost now. What is the relevance to this in entrepreneurship? It's market research.
I think we can connect it back to entrepreneurship if we try hard enough. It actually is. It is like marketing, but I think that's something that I wanted to say to that was that yes, the macro and the micro do definitely go hand in hand. And I think that one way to simplify what you just said could be just when you go and you observe something in the street or in a small space or in a small subgroup, then you can see what behaviors there are and what people are doing. And then you can make kind of analyses, or you can analyze why they might be doing those things. And then once you figure out why they might be doing those things, then it tells you a little bit about that culture as a whole and what that culture's values might be, which so it kind of moves up from micro to macro. And I kind of relate it back to how you can tell how someone, like what someone's insecurities are just based off of what they bring up. So for example, if someone was insecure about their weight, or if someone was insecure about their intelligence, then they might defend themselves against someone who is saying like, oh, hey, you're fat, or like, hey, I don't know if that dress is going to fit you, or that shirt's going to fit you, or something like that. If the person's insecure about their weight, then they're going to be like, yes, it does. And they're going to try and prove that person wrong. And then you can tell that that person's insecure about that. And then the same thing kind of goes for intelligence. And there are a million other ways that we can take this and then move it up to marketing. Like we can say that, I guess I'm just BSing at this point, but I think that we've kind of made our point. Like I think that we've run that point dry. What do you think?
No, we got one more point before it's completely dry. I was thinking like one of the mistakes that people make with understanding social sciences in this particular field, and I think this is completely like rampant in the academic world, by the way, is all these theories of understanding people's backgrounds, what it means to them. It's a very low resolution way of understanding the human being. There's nothing more unique and diverse than the individual. So when we look at like, if I were to read a book on, say, I don't know, give me a random culture, French Canadian culture, Russia.
Okay,
sure.
French Canadian culture.
Let's go with that, or let's go with Russian culture, right?
Okay.
Let's say like introduction to Russian culture, and I take that and I start treating people, individuals, as if they're a product of the book I just read. I'm going to be wrong, like, pretty often. But what it does, but what that kind of macro theory, what it does do a lot of, how it's a useful tool is it gives me better assumptions about an individual I'm working with. And when I'm talking to the individual, I'm always looking to be proven wrong on my assumptions.
Yeah.
Because, like, for example, like Russia, it's a first of all, it's a massive and it's a very old culture.
Yes.
There's generational issues, generational differences. It's like, when was that book written? Who was it written by?
Yeah.
How close were they to the culture? What are their assumptions? You still have to read like 20 different books on, say, Russian culture, and then you got to spend time with Russian people, and then you got to correlate the two. And then also, because we're in Canada, it's usually when people immigrate over here, it's a particular subset of Russian culture that moves here. And I don't know about you, but I noticed with a lot of immigrants, they typically are in Canada because they have issues with their home country. So like a lot of, so basically like a lot of the like Iranians, for example, I know they're very non-religious, even though when you look at the government of Iran, it's very religious. So then it's like, what's going on? Well, it's because the people who are not like the, kind of like the current culture, they don't like that, so that's why they're here.
That culture, they have to leave.
So it gives us a lot of like, I mean, like this information, it gives us a very low resolution view. So it gives us like certain like something that's a little bit better than a stereotype, but you're only like one step better. Yeah, I
like the way that you put it as a low resolution view, because another thing that I forgot to mention is that as an anthropologist, whenever they make those, whenever they analyze the observations that they've taken, they're still analyzing it then through their own filter, and they're still analyzing it and giving it kind of a bias-y. And so whenever someone reads that, like when someone reads this published ethnography or something like that, that has already been put through the filter of the anthropologist, so you're kind of seeing that culture or that group of people through that blurred lens that the anthropologist had like put up in front of the viewer, and then the viewer has their own lens, and then that kind of blurs the actual image even more. So that person reading the ethnography cannot just read it and then assume that they know that everything about that culture, because that would be false. And they, when it comes down to it, they have to go to that culture, and then maybe when they go there, as long as they can keep an open mind, like they should just keep an open mind, maybe learn some things about the culture and about the history of the culture before they go, so they don't know just how to be respectful. And then once people open up to them, then they can learn about what the real experience of that group of people is.
All right, good. So I think now we've milked up that
yes.
topic.
I think that we definitely needed to touch on that, though, because I didn't want to make it seem like the anthropologist doesn't have a filter. That is a very huge part of it. Yeah. The freelancers that I know in Canada, a lot of them are just a couple years younger than me. or they're older than me and they have a more established business than I would be able to establish at this point. Like I'm 25, and even though that sounds kind of young, and a lot of people consider that young, it's not really that young in the freelancing sphere, because a lot of the freelancers started off in high school or university by trying to find clients for the skills that they had, because a lot of people learned those skills back in high school or like early university. So if you wanted to become a photographer, if you wanted to actually have clients and make a full-time living, make photography your full-time job by the time that you're 25 or something like that, then you'd have to establish a client base either in high school or in early university, and kind of use that client base to help you make a little bit of money while you're also like working on school and that kind of thing. And then eventually, like, it just takes time for connections to build up and for people to talk about the good work that you do. So it just is a matter of how fast word of mouth spreads. And generally, if you started earlier, word of mouth will spread quicker, or at least not quicker, but you'll have had more time for the word of mouth to spread.
Okay. So time is definitely a big part of it. And then, so you mentioned, I never thought about that. Like a lot of people who are staple freelancers and have a good amount of clientele coming through. Yeah, they did start when they're 12. You know, they downloaded Photoshop or they did something, they played around on YouTube, and then now they're doing it professionally. So for someone who's like, say, your age, looking to get into freelance work, they're working their 9 to 5 and they want to supplement their income or work towards a career change, what's your advice to someone who did not start when they were 12? Like they're someone with zero and they like what you're doing and they want to do something similar.
So I am coming from a little bit of a place of privilege here too, because when I graduated from university, I was able to go to Cameroon and then get my experience there. And also CUSO paid for my flight and my medications and everything. So I didn't actually end up spending any money while I was there. Like I came home a little bit richer than when I had went off to Cameroon. So that was kind of nice. And then I stayed at my parents' house for like 6 months before I found a full-time job, just applying for jobs and that kind of thing. And then when I found a full-time job, I just saved up a bunch of money. And when I left my full-time job, I had enough money saved up that I have like a little bit of a safety net, so that I was able to just full-time focus on finding clients for a straight 2 months. And a lot of people will have a full-time job and then hustle on the side on evenings and weekends. I found that extremely difficult to do, because a lot of the hustling involves reaching out to potential clients, and it's difficult to do that around 5 or 6 p.m. when most businesses are closed, especially in Grimsby, when like I would want to just like walk around with my business cards or something like that and hand them out to businesses, but those businesses are already closed because it's past 5. And then on weekends, I don't know, I don't want to make up excuses for people either, but it's definitely easy to focus all of your time and energy on freelancing when you have all of the time in the world, like days and months even. So I found that really beneficial to just have enough money saved up so that I could dedicate a straight 2 months of full-time work on finding clients and establishing a brand for myself.
Okay, so it'd actually be better to save up money working my job full-time and then spending a whole period of time going full-time looking for clients and finding work.
Yeah, I found that really useful for me. Like that worked for me. And I know that the hustle lifestyle works for a lot of other people. I was honestly just exhausted a lot of the time after I finished work at the end of the day. So I just would not feel motivated to go and hustle and get in my computer. Although I still made short films sometimes with the Niagara Film Collective, which is this one filmmaking group that I love that's kind of close to me. It's Niagara Falls. It's like a half an hour away from where I live, because I live in like closer to Hamilton, like 10 minutes east of Hamilton. And so, yeah, like it's nice to have that little film community and edit some videos kind of on the side, but I wasn't really like hustling hard and looking for clients who actually paid me money, And I also wasn't registered. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So it sounds like go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to also mention that I wasn't registered as a sole proprietor either. So that is also something you want to look into if you want to be a freelancer and you haven't thought about that yet. It's just registering as that. Yeah, okay.
Go on. So it sounds like that if you're doing the side hustle thing, that's more of like akin to having a hobby. Like you have your main job and this is just something that you're doing on the side, which is not a problem. And sometimes people get paid for their hobbies. But then if you really wanted to do a career change or you wanted to actually get into freelance seriously, it sounds like it's way more efficient. Just focus on your job, save the money, and then go at it full time.
Yeah, I think so, because I feel like you just wouldn't want to be hustling and spending all of your
Mhm.
energy on hustling and emailing people, making connections and doing odd jobs on the weekend and that kind of thing, because that leaves you zero time to learn. And I found it
Mhm.
very beneficial when I was working full time to spend time on my own, just learning about marketing and learning about branding and learning about graphic design and editing and video and photo and everything like that, because then I could take these skills that I was learning during my time working, and then I could apply those and actually use them when I left my job. Like, it's learning is such a huge part of it, and if you don't learn, then you don't even have any real skills, and you always have to be learning. So it's better to like have that base for sure.
Mhm. Okay. Um,
Yeah.
that's interesting. So you're full-time working, basically part-time learning, and then
Hmm.
saving the money so that you can quit and then start doing that full-time with the skills that you've learned.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then I have to mention one other thing. It's just that when you quit your full-time job, of course, like if you have enough money saved up that you can pay for your expenses and that kind of thing, that's great. But I was also lucky because I have a very cheap apartment in Grimsby. Like, it's way cheaper than in Toronto, and I
Hmm.
also split it with my fiance. So we pay, honestly, between the two of us, we pay $425 each, and it's a 2-bedroom apartment.
Hmm.
So we just found a pretty cheap place to live, and yeah, so we're just kind of lucky in that way too.
Hmm.
Yeah, like there's some luck that goes into it. There's a little bit of luck in everything.
Hmm. Yeah, a little bit of luck, but at the same time making use of what you have.
Yes, definitely. And I think that everyone can do that. Everyone can find the resources that they have, just look around them. Maybe it's people, maybe it's things, maybe it's money, maybe it's skills, and just use those in whatever way you think is good. Everyone can come up with a different business strategy if they focus on their resources.
I mean, like, look at what you're doing right now. You're working with a community of people who have even less resources than that.
Yeah, that's
It's like, I
true.
mean, what would those people give to pay for a very expensive apartment rental in Toronto and have no time, right? I mean,
I have no
like,
idea.
yeah, but like if given the
Yeah.
opportunity, I'm pretty sure so many people in that part of the world would just jump on it. The life that we're
Yeah,
complaining about here,
potentially.
there's all these people there who put, so long as they're willing to leave their communities behind,
Yeah.
they'd be willing to take it.
Yeah.
And we
I
definitely
think
see
a
a lot
lot
of
of
that in Canada.
them, yeah, I think a lot of them wouldn't really be willing to leave their communities, and also their job potential is in Tanzania because they completely understand the culture and the community that they're
Mhm.
living in. And so when it comes to marketing their businesses, it's kind of easier to do that in Tanzania because they understand the Tanzanian market.
Mhm.
Yeah, does
Okay,
that make sense? Yeah,
yeah, that
okay,
makes
cool.
sense. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
not that they wouldn't want to live in Toronto, because maybe they would want to live in Toronto, but I think everyone's a little bit more comfortable in their own home country.
Okay, yeah, yeah. You know
Yeah.
what it is? It's because I live in a biased community. I'm surrounded by communities of immigrants who did not think. I think most people think that way about their own
Hmm.
area of where they live. I just live with
Yeah,
around people who decide they're going to move from their old country, leave everything behind, and come here. So
totally.
everyone I
Yeah.
know and everyone's parents that they have, they're all here because they just left it all behind to come here. So I have like a completely, that's
Yeah.
interesting, low resolution view based on my assumptions from the immigrants that
Yeah.
I grew up around.
And that is a whole other topic. Like, I'm
Mhm.
sure that they have their own histories and reasons why they came to live in Canada too. And it's based on struggles that they were facing in their home country. But if
Mhm.
if the people here in Tanzania have people or organizations or nonprofits or projects in Tanzania that can help them, like boost their business or teach them some skills or something like that, then they don't really need to move to another country because they have support in their home country.
Mhm.
And then, there's something else that I want to mention about the T-Led project too. So the T-Led project was started 5 years ago by VSO and CUSO, which are, so CUSO is the Canadian organization that I talked about before, and then VSO is basically its European equivalent. And before, CUSO and VSO were partnered up, and that's how the project came out. It's kind of like their baby. But
Mhm.
now the project is wrapping up in 2 months, so at the end of March. And so then there's this other organization that's a Tanzanian organization called SIDO, SIDO, and
Mhm.
that one is taking over the T-Led project. So the T-Led project isn't ending, it's just being transitioned over to SIDO. And then
Mhm.
everything is going to be done in Tanzania, and hopefully it will continue.
Mhm.
It was like and then entrepreneurs will continue to have that support from the organization and from the project.
All right. So if our
Yeah.
viewers want to get in contact with you for more information about what you're doing, or even if they want to get hire you for some services, where can they reach you at?
So I have a website. My website is erinforreal.com, but I have to spell it out because it's actually spelled out like Erin for eel, and it's spelled out with two E's because I did a little pun, and it's like a film reel, you know. So it's ERIN FOREEL.com. I'll say it again just for fun. Even though you're probably going to put it in the description or something like that, but it's ERIN FOREEL.com. And then my
so for real,
Instagram,
there's no two R's.
Yeah, there's no two R's. There's just one R. And then for my Instagram, it is the one that I use the most, like my personal one that I post almost. I'm actually doing a February challenge right now, so I'm posting on Instagram every day. And that Instagram account is ERINBETZK. So it's Erin Betts with a ZK. Betts, like Betty is my middle name, so that's where Betts came from. And then if you go on there, you can see my business Instagram account too with some of my portfolio stuff.
All right. All that information will be on the description and on the screen right now.
Awesome.
All
Okay,
right.
cool.
Thanks for
It
being
was
on the
really
show.
nice to talk to you. Yeah, thank you.